From Taipei, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. The news here, as you must know, is actually a bit sad and ironic, I should say, as well. Early in the pandemic, when I was discussing repertoire, I suggested that there should be a plan B in case there was any kind of flare-up of COVID-19 infections. I was assured at that time, however, that everything is so well under control here that there would be no possibility of that. As I've just experienced, that belief that there would be no possibility was a serious mistake. I mean, Taiwan, with great success, sealed itself off from the coronavirus, but having done that, it seems that it did little to ensure the health of the population in the long term, which can only be through vaccination. Well, I'm here. I do hope that I will still be able to participate in at least some kind of chamber performance, and I'm waiting to find out. Well, that said, the news this past week in the world has been pretty bleak, I have to say. The U.S. is still battling the fake news that the election was rife with voter fraud, and the cynicism of the Republicans in promoting this to divert attention from their attempts to disempower the majority of the country, and to do this simply for their own profit, I find mind-boggling. That's right, mind-boggling. Oh, God. And as we look around the world, we see the epidemic of violence has only escalated this week. And of all the horrific events which have been happening, what struck me especially somehow was the wrenchingly tragic bombing May 9th right next to a girls' high school in Kabul, Afghanistan. It was time to create maximum destruction, and it brought back once again to me how girls and women bear the brunt of tragedy, actually. And again, I thought of the great anthropological thinker Claude Lévi-Strauss. He was dismissed by the profession as someone who made blanket statements without scientific proof, that he was not a real scientist, and that is perhaps true. But for me, that was actually his strength. There have been people who, under the so-called guise of science, have had striking insights which were not at all scientific. Of course, the person who comes to mind immediately was Freud. But Lévi-Strauss is another one of these. When he stated that the original currency or form of money, as it was women, and meaning by that that's something to be possessed, to be traded, to be used to pay debts, his statement was met with derision, but it actually rings very true, as we see more and more today, in fact. Okay, there's too much to think about in this week, so I don't say anything more about current events, and I just move on from cultural anthropology, let's say, to physical anthropology. And I read that there's new evidence that studies of Neanderthal teeth have shown that they ate a high carbohydrate diet. I'm a little bit like that, I don't know why. And that may have actually fueled brain development. This I read in the Smithsonian. Now this is all interesting and could be significant. Of course, there are other studies which have shown that early hominids, which were, I should say, genetically related or similar of the same species, they ate different diets depending on what was available where they lived. Well, that's probably like all of us. Now, though, there's an Israeli study, which I also read about in the Smithsonian earlier, that early humans, I should say Homo sapiens, may have actually decimated the population of large animals. And what that meant, though, is that they had to hunt smaller animals, and to do that, they needed greater ingenuity. And that led to greater cognitive abilities and to an increase in the cerebral cortex. So does that mean that the protein-rich Homo sapiens actually overwhelmed the carbohydrate-loaded Neanderthals, and that actually explains why there are no Neanderthals today? Okay, I will move on very shortly to our main topic, which is double tonguing. But from the Journal of Morphology, I just read something that really was remarkable, I thought. There is a worm, and I have to read it here because of course I can't remember what it is. It's called Ramisilis mullicaudata, something like that. It's a worm which lives inside of sea sponges, and it has one head and more than 100, possibly up to 1,000 butts. Now, when it comes time to reproduce, these butts actually grow eyes and brains and swim off independently to become fertilized. Wow, that's really remarkable. Now, one other thing about that is interesting, is that they could never find any traces of food in what would be their sort of called elementary canals. They have so many of them. So nobody knows what they ate. Maybe they were just simply on a diet all the time. That's, well, with all those butts, I wonder. Well, but that is all I have to say before moving on to, for us, our more serious subject. Today's subject will be double tonguing. And now to double tonguing. Okay, first thing to understand is that just like circular breathing, which I talked about last week, double tonguing for probably most of you will be a new technique. So you have to be prepared for the fact that it's not going to sound good. And it's going to take time to actually not only master, but actually come to a basic level. So, what is the issue of double tonguing? There are different types of double tonguing. The first thing I will do is, I should say, sort of explain how I teach the one type of double tonguing, which I think is most practical for the clarinet. And of course, some of you who do double tonguing in a different way may have a different idea, and that's, of course, totally fine. Okay, so, the double tonguing that I teach is a do-gu-do-gu-do-gu-do-gu-do-gu-do-gu-do. This is, and I like the French explanation of syllables, which is a do-gu-gu, which is the U is of course an E in the back and an U in the front, which is good for the clarinet in general. Okay, now, I don't like taka-taka-taka-ta. That's especially true because in the English language, let me put my clarinet down again. I don't know why I'm holding it and trying to gesticulate with one hand. Okay, so tuka tuka. The K in the English language, and in actually many languages of the world, is back on the soft palate of the mouth. K. So you get a tuk, k, k, and you cannot get a sharp enough sort of enunciation. I mean, people will say attack. I don't like the word attack. I'm not very enamored of attacking the clarinet or any other thing. That's why the g is farther forward, and you can actually experiment with it. Say k, g, k, g. The g is on your hard palate. Otherwise, you have a r, which is also a consonant which some languages use. But we don't use a r, but we use a g, g, g. And the important thing is that the g should be as far forward in the mouth as possible, and also should be as strong and as pointed as possible. And for this, we have to practice. Basically, of course, because we've been tonguing more or less since we've begun studying. But the g part is new. And the muscles, of course, are not used to doing that. They're not strong enough, and they are not sensitive enough. So just like with circular breathing and this that we need, here we have to exercise these muscles. So I start teaching with the Sylvia, gu, 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 gu. And one thing very important is I think it's best not to bother with repeated notes. Repeated notes on the clarinet are more difficult and, of course, less useful. Some pieces have repeated notes, but generally we play scales, we play arpeggios, we play different figurations. And, of course, once you can do a scale decently with double tonguing, then you will be able to do repeated notes with double tonguing as well. So, here we go. The beginning, we just do gu, 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 gu. And you just punch those notes out, and you don't worry about how you sound. Very, very important. That's not double tonguing, but that's just checking to make sure this works. Okay, so, gu, gu. And I do something simple, F major scale on the clarinet, it's the most simple thing to do. So, and you can go up to a D even. Okay, so you just punch these out, and I should say that you don't worry if you squeak or if it doesn't come out well, whatever, you just do it. We are not dealing here with music. We are dealing here with training muscles. So in other words, rather than going to the gym, you just practice your gu, and at least you develop your tongue muscles. Okay, so once again, I do this, and I'll do this in a rather bad way. So, something like that. Let it happen. And just do again and try to get more point. So if that works, then you do slower so they can go go, go. And it's also good to do this without the clarinet. And I always like to reinforce things with my hands. You can also reinforce with your feet, but whatever. Anyway, so go, go. So it's like that way. And the go actually involves a motion which goes forward. So it's not go, but a go. So it goes with the air forward. So I do once again. And it's really just sort of whack. Maybe you do attack these notes. Okay. Okay, so you just keep doing this until you can do fairly well up to the D. And for this also, we have to remember the partials that I've been always talking about, and the way the embouchure moves, the way the bottom, and the teeth of the bottom especially, moves along the reed. Because a lot of the problems that people have with double tonguing, and I hear that often, same with circular breathing, and that's my classes are sort of, it's like all like this. I think I have to redo them somehow. I'm taking this particular video with what's called a selfie. That's a funny word. So I can actually see myself. I think it's a little easier than my previous one when I did different takes to try to get the right angle, and then I did it in the normal way with the other camera. But this seems to be all right, so I will do this time. But since I see myself, it's like, oh God, what do I look like? This is awful, with my glasses here or here, etc., 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 and my hair much too long. But this is the time of the pandemic anyway. Okay, so why do I mention these partials? Because as you go up and down, the embouchure has to follow that, and the g of the double tonguing should not get in the way of actually having the correct embouchure for the correct partial. So, you go. So I'm following along, and that enables me to do this good. Okay, so now you do this, and it's good to do different patterns as well. You know, very simple patterns where maybe. You know, just make them up. I think it's nice to be a little bit creative while we're doing this sort of tongue calisthenics exercise. Okay. So once you can do that well, then you move to the next step. And the next step is to involve the front of the tongue. So notice the do. Excuse me. The do, go, do, go, do, go, do, go, do, go. That way. But we do it backwards. The reason we do it backwards is that the gu still has to be the focus of attention, and it has to be active. Now, what I mean by that is that it shouldn't be like a duk, gu, duk, and then you get stuck here, but do, gu. So if you do that on a strong beat, gu, do, gu, do, gu, do, gu, do, gu, do, gu, then you actually keep the gu being active, and you exercise the proper motion of the gu to create a double tongue. Okay, so we do this. Gu. And I'm really punching out the gu, so you can probably hear it as a gu, gu, gu. And that's a good thing when you're practicing. Okay. Again, you do different patterns. Maybe. For instance, okay, so good, 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 good. And then also you can actually play certain etudes, some pieces that you already know well, and you do with a good, 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 good. And you keep doing this with scales. Don't bother with repeated notes particularly, although if you want to experiment at this stage, of course you may. I was going to say I give you permission, but of course that's silly. So, just do it, and you can increase the speed this way. If you're a person who likes the metronome, you can use the metronome. I actually feel that the metronome is our friend, in fact. So I use the metronome quite a lot. But in something like this, it's maybe yes, maybe no, because you're not trying for a particular speed, you're just trying for muscular mastery of the gu. See, we have to be gu masters. Okay. Keep doing that, and again, as I said, get faster, and you can even do it in short bursts. Etc. Okay, and I'm purposely doing it's kind of not so well, just to imitate what it probably will sound like. But you just do it, okay? And finally, you can probably go. Okay. So, what is the next step? After you do this well, then you can reverse it. So you have a do-gu, 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 do. And you have to keep that paying attention to the fact that the gu is just as active as it is when it's on the strong beat. Okay. And you have to guard against a kind of a like that. Okay. So, what is important also, I would say, is that you don't try to tongue short notes. We are always basically always worried that our staccato is not short enough. Forget about that. You should be long so that the actual air keeps going, so you don't stop that. And of course, the one thing that's I think is totally impossible, and I will explain maybe about regular tonguing a little bit on this, although I probably should have a whole stream about regular tonguing. I just even today I saw I happened to click on something by mistake and saw a totally ridiculous explanation of tonguing. I generally, when I see see a message about that at all, I flee immediately. But I made a mistake. Anyway, that's beside the point. Okay, so you tongue long, and you make sure that everything follows the partials, as I said. So here. That, something like that. And then again, you do patterns, you play pieces with that, everything. Always feel long. It's always long this way. Do chromatic scales. Something like that. And you can try to go above a D, in fact. It gets harder, and I will explain that in a minute about why that is the case. So that something like that, and that's quite difficult, and I'm not doing so well at the moment, but I will do better. But anyway, okay, so this is the do-gu, 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 do that I use. Now I will explain why when we get into the fifth partial, it's particularly hard to do. So here I'm going to actually repeat notes, and I'll start over here just to save time. And the D works pretty well. So then I go up. That gets a little bit more difficult, and what I will often do there is something I don't do very often. Wow, my hand. Ooh. But I will move down a little bit so you can actually see what is happening. This is online life. So, and why did I want to see? Yeah, because that this will help sort of mask the kind of grunt that. Then the G also is difficult, but begins to be possible. And then when we get up higher, and my reed's a little soft, but you can hear that it becomes actually much easier, so that the 7th partial is not so difficult for double tonguing. 9th partial is not so hard. 11th partial also is not so difficult if you actually can play those notes. And why is that the case? Again, we go back to the partials, and when you're playing 5th partial notes, generally you need a lot of mouthpiece in your mouth. It's you see, I'm always playing down here for 5th partial, so this is actually rather open. So it's very hard for the tongue to get a decent g when you're that open. And that is the issue with the 5th partial. The 3rd partial, as you go up, begins to be that way. But it's very possible to do. It's not totally. And then as you go up, remember that the right hand of the clarinet is, in a way, the good joint, the right hand joint, because the register key actually works for these notes, especially from the C sharp D. Those are the primary notes which this register key affects. So that's why it is possible. Then as you go up to the E harder, so I can sort of get it. That's but that's okay, sort of. And then easy. Okay, so this is the basic description of double tonguing, and just have patience and make sure that the notes are long, and you will actually be able to double tongue. Now, I mentioned one more thing about this kind of double tonguing, because part of the issue of the difficulty of double, I'm going to go back like you can see my hand once again. Yeah, that's better. Is that when you are double tonguing, your tongue is moving a certain way half as quickly as it would be if you're single tonguing. So if you're single tonguing, the feeling of the d is on every note. That way. And I'm so uncoordinated this morning. Yeah, getting better. Yeah. Sometimes I feel I need to warm up. Sometimes I feel that I warmed up 30 years ago, so I don't need to. Anyway, double tonguing, you are actually hitting the reed, or touching the reed, I should say, half the time, not every time. So it becomes psychologically confusing. That's why you should also practice just tonguing every other note. So again, I go back to F major because the easiest. That way. And you do that a bit, and you can do, again, even there, different patterns. And then all you need to do is you just raise the back of the tongue. So rather than again, remember that E. So instead of you get that way, and you get a very nice leggero tonguing because you already practiced the G, so that your body knows how to do that. And then you have the shape of the tongue, which keeps the air going through. So if I do quite fast, then I get that. Okay, and it's maybe even, too long, and then you can fine-tune that finally, or that more like, so you actually squeeze the mouth a little more with that. And that is a basic kind of double tonguing that I do with the touching, with the regular sort of tongue, and then the G. There are different types of double tonguing too, and I will explain them now. Actually, so the basic type of double tonguing that I do involves the front of the tongue actually being quite low on the reed, and that is actually the way I also tongue normally, so that the tongue actually follows the contour of the embouchure as you go up and down, and that allows you to tongue well in every register. Okay, I'll deal with that more another time perhaps. So that's why. Whoa, I do that way. Now there's another type where you're actually doing this kind of there, and to do that, actually, I tilt the clarinet this way, so the tongue is sort of going like this. The only danger is that you could bleed if you actually touch the tip, to sort of rub too much on the tip. That's not the way I tongue normally, but it has its use, and I do use it sometimes. So that I don't do it so well in the very high register, simply because I think that I have never needed to actually use it particularly there, so I'm not as well practiced in that, but maybe I will practice and get better at that kind of double tonguing in the high register. The reason that that's not my normal way of double tongue is that it's not my normal way of tonguing itself. And not only that, I find that if you're using the type of double tonguing I mentioned, and I went through the steps to actually accomplish, that double tonguing will allow you different kinds of nuance in the double tongue. So you can go a little shorter if you want. It is very simple. Or, things like that. While this kind is actually very limited, I find, in terms of the different ways that you can articulate while double tonguing. So but it's useful in particular places. I can't actually think of where right now, but I do use it, and it can be pretty fast if you need. We continue now with our discussion of double tonguing. My little Bluetooth mic unfortunately got cut out and I had to go and recharge it. So here we go. I probably will recap a little bit. So I had talked about the basic way of practicing double tonguing already, and I also introduced the second kind where you're sort of going like this, right? And I mentioned that I do not use that so much. I basically do the sort of what I call the standard double tonguing. But I do use that sometimes, and I find it especially useful in the low register. I'm not so accomplished in using it in the high register, as I mentioned, just simply because I haven't really felt the need to practice it so much. But the low register sometimes is like that. A little bit can be sort of tubby if you're double tongue, but that will work very well. Now, there's a third type of double tonguing, and that is very kind of unusual, and it's sort of, we can look, see, blah, 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 blah. Sorry, I just spaced out. So it's a diddle, 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 diddle. It's a diddle, 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 diddle. If you can do that, then you can do a kind of double tongue, which can be useful because it's very leggero and it can be incredibly fast if you feel like it. So here, and as you go up, of course, it gets more difficult. And it gets kind of like that. Although that has its useful as a kind of effect for certain things. But here, that can really kind of be impressive, perhaps. So, those are the basic types of double tonguing that I use myself. And there is another kind as well. Actually, there are two more possibilities, and I will mention them now rather briefly. One is you actually go slide side to side on the reed, and historically, we find references to that. And that. I don't use it, but try it out. It may work for you. Oh, my glasses again. And there's another one, which I think I did mention at one time, which is a kind of coughing, which is not actually tonguing at all. Although, as also in one of the very early live streams, when I was talking about period instruments and articulation, I mentioned how there were many different kinds of articulation, and even in the writings about instruments, there were writings about many different kinds of articulations. And one is a kind of cough. So I'm going to do. It's just, and that's a vocal cord sort of tonguing. And I don't use it very much, but I use it occasionally. I used to use it more, and it was good for so I sometimes combine that, so it kind of something like that for particular kinds of effects. And yeah, aside from that, I don't really use it particularly now, but it does once in a while come in handy to have. So probably these are all the types of double tonguing there are. If there's something else, you should let me know. And what I would like to do now is actually present a demonstration of a couple of short bits of pieces. I had mentioned in the last live stream about the A minor Paganini caprice with that one. But I started practicing it, and I thought, this is so boring to try to once again get it up, the whole thing. So I didn't bother. Maybe sometime I will, but it's what I did at one stage in my career, and maybe I don't need to spend the time to do it, although I may become inspired. If I do, I will let you know. Then I will play the whole thing. So I just thought to do a couple of little examples. That was a little bit of The Round of the Goblins by Bazzini, a piece which may be a bit silly, but a piece which I fell in love with when I was around 5 years old, and I heard the remarkable performance of the violinist Jascha Heifetz. Instead of the A minor caprice, I thought I would play Variation 9 from Paganini's 24th caprice, where he uses left-hand pizzicato to great effect. Let's see with the double tongue in a kind of percussive way whether I can kind of emulate that. I always plan too much for these live streams, and this week is no exception. I was thinking that I would also do what I would call kind of an in-depth or a close-up look at what I mean when I'm saying that technique involves form. But that will wait till next week, I think. And what I would prefer to do is to end this week with two recordings I made. The first from Moscow with the wonderful Russian pianist Marina Garkhalinskaya of the Scherzo movement of Fauré's first violin sonata, Opus 13, and then the finale of Mendelssohn's 1838 violin sonata, Opus Posthumus, from a concert in Bamberg, Germany, with the brilliant pianist Katsura Mizumoto. Please enjoy, please take care, and I hope to see you next week again. Bye-bye now.